Hello and welcome. I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this particular video, I'm going to be talking about the lunar eclipse on the 28th of October 2023, which happens or it takes place in the signs of Scorpio, Taurus, full moon itself in Taurus, and it happens at 20:15 UTC, so that you can do the calculation according to where you are in the world. Now, we're going to be able to see this eclipse from many parts of the world. Sometimes it's just exclusively one side of it, but we've really got a huge swathe of the world able to see this eclipse. It's a partial eclipse, so it's going to look something like this. But whether it's partial or it's total, whatever it may be, an eclipse is an eclipse is an eclipse, which means it is a powerful marker of very important events, whether that means events in your own personal life, especially if it connects with something in your own chart, or whether we're talking about world events. And of course, this particular eclipse is the second one in this little tiny series. We had a solar eclipse on the 14th of October. This is now the lunar eclipse. And these two eclipses joined together really have come at a time of great global upset, real strife. And we can see that played out in events, certainly in Israel, Gaza, and there have been lots of other things going on as well. The political world is heaving in many countries, whether you're looking at Poland, Slovakia, Australia with its vote about the indigenous people. So many things going on that are really game-changing. And I often do say that about eclipses, solar or lunar, they are game changers. So, as I said, you will be able to see this eclipse from Africa right through up into Europe, into the United Kingdom, across through to Asia. That includes China, India, Indonesia, Japan, and a bit of Australia, the sort of eastern side of it we'll probably see. And the way to tell is that as long as the sun is sort of set and you can see the moon in the sky, then you're going to be able to see this particular eclipse at the relevant time for your part of the world. Now, for those of you who wonder what an eclipse is, it's all to do with the relative positions of the sun and the moon, the nodal axis, the path of the moon, when it meets the path of the sun, and the involvement of the earth. So on this occasion, with a lunar eclipse, the earth has come between the sun and the moon. In other words, the sun is at the opposite point to the moon. We'd call that an opposition in astrology, and we can see that that is an eclipse. Now, eclipses, especially lunar eclipses, have to do with the end of a cycle. When we look at new moons and solar eclipses, we think about new beginnings and things happening in a kind of blaze of glory. But when we come to lunar eclipses, which are eclipsed full moons, then we're looking at things that are ending. We're looking at bringing the curtain down on something. So I'll talk about that in a little minute. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is interesting, especially if you're an astrology buff or you're really interested in the astronomical side of astrology, then this is part of a Saros cycle or a Saros series 146. Now that means that there is a huge cycle of eclipses that began, actually this one began in 1541, September the 15th, 1541, and it's going to go on for many years to come. A Saros series can last anything from 12 to 15 centuries. And so you get these eclipses occurring in that particular Saros cycle. It doesn't mean that all the ones in an 18-month period belong to that particular cycle. It can vary. But I was interested enough when I looked at 146, and I thought, is there a kind of connecting principle between all these eclipses that occur in this cycle. So I went back to the beginning, had a look at 1541, and these were the significant events that came out of that year. Now, one of them was that Michelangelo finished his painting of the Sistine Chapel. And his last painting here was The Last Judgment. So if ever you've seen that, it's pretty amazing. And the idea of the Last Judgment, well, I'll leave that with you for a minute. But the other significant event was that King Henry VIII sent his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, to the Tower, and she was executed the following year. Now, thinking of resonances, I'm not sure King Charles is going to send Queen Camilla to the Tower and have her executed next year. But there's an interesting resonance here with the, Great Britain's royal family. And I do think the idea of the Last Judgment, which makes us think about heaven and earth and our actions on earth and, what is it leading to? Are we being judged? Will we be judged? What's that all about? And we think of the events in recent weeks just prior to the solar eclipse on the 14th of October. We're looking at the 7th of October with the invasion into Israel by Hamas, which actually was a complete massacre. So that had kicked off a whole lot of the events that have happened subsequently. Now, I am actually recording this event a day after the solar eclipse, so I'm sure by the time that this is uploaded, we'll have moved apace with events in that part of the world. But I will be sort of casting a little glance at that because I'm actually going to look at the chart from the perspective of Jerusalem, in fact. But before I get there, I want to look at generalities again. And I was thinking about, well, what is the nature? Well, what are we dealing with an eclipse on the Scorpio-Taurus axis? Well, the first thing that comes to mind really is the idea of finances. That may be to do with our personal finances, but it's also to do with the global economy. So we might see some sharp decreases or panics or something like that related to this particular eclipse. We're looking at Taurus in particular because the moon itself is in Taurus. And when we look at the sign of Taurus and we think about the things in life that Taurus resonates with, then we're looking at things to do with housing, we're looking at building, we're looking at agriculture, we're looking at nursing. And of course, we had a previous lunar eclipse on the same axis, this time the sun in Taurus, the moon in Scorpio. We had that happen on the 5th of May. And if you remember that period, of course, it was the coronation of King Charles. Here comes our resonance with 1541, sort of. But then we might also want to think about, certainly in England, and of course across the world, really, there are so many strikes, so many kind of upheavals and protests going on everywhere. But we've been particularly under fire in England, really, with the National Health Service. So I think, again, we're looking at this lunar eclipse and thinking, oh, my goodness, this is going to also bring things to a head. But let's not forget that a lunar eclipse is about ending. So could we be looking at a solution to all these particularly stressful, difficult situations? Well, we might be. Now, of course, I'm going to look at your your 12 individual perspectives through the signs after I finish looking at the pattern of what's going on at the moment and doing a little bit more on this. So I will be able to give you a little bit more detail about what's going on relative to your chart. What I wanted to say before that was something about my book, which is my recent book, which is The Art of Astrology, it's The Art of Interpretation, the Astrology Handbook, Part 1. For those of you really, really interested in astrology, or students, or those of you quite a lot about it, but are just kind of looking for some kind of interesting aspects of it, then this book is for you. It makes the whole way of interpreting a natal chart much simpler. You've got a structure, you've got some key points where you go to. And so might I suggest that you take a look at that on Amazon.com or on my own website, if you like, Astrolutely.com, to find out a few more details. So let's go straight to our horoscope and have a look at how this particular lunar eclipse looks in the sense of the setting with all the other planets. So here we go. As you can see, this is an interesting chart, isn't it? And as you can see, I set it from Jerusalem because of the dreadful upheaval and tragedies and cataclysms going on in that area. And remember, it came out of nowhere. There were, in fact, peace talks going on, or at least discussions within the rest of parts of the Middle East, the Arab Emirates, thinking to include Israel more. And so everything looked as though it was heading in the right direction until suddenly Hamas entered Israel and kicked off what we are looking at. So Jerusalem, of course, is both claimed by Palestine as its great spiritual city from time, across time, and the same for Israel. So it seemed to me to be particularly appropriate to set it for this. It will serve, this chart serves both sides, so to speak. Although I want to say just a tiny little bit here about the fact that Hamas does not represent all Palestinians. And that's a very complicated story, but we sort of need to make a bit of a differentiation as to where the attack came from. And also we need to look at, obviously, the deep distress, everything that's going on to the Palestinian community. So, as I said, this chart serves a variety of interests, if you like. But let's look at the eclipse here, the sun at the base of the chart and the moon up there at the top of the chart. And you'll notice that it's very close to the planet Jupiter. It's also close to an opposition to Mercury, and we can see Mars heading that way. So we can see a lot of dynamic angles taking place already with this lunar eclipse. It's got Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, also involved in it. And one of the things I look at when I'm looking at Mercury, Jupiter aspects, Mars, Jupiter aspects, I think about expansion, of course. That's the key word for Jupiter. But expansion can mean inflation. And we can get situations spiraling out of control with this setup, every bit as much as you could see sort of philanthropic and noble kind of gestures and that kind of nobility coming into this. Well, it's not all noble. It can also be extreme and also out of control. So we need to bear in mind that this is influencing this particular lunar eclipse. Now, the other thing you'll probably notice when we're looking at this chart is the position of Pluto, which is right on the angle. So at the time of that lunar eclipse, we've got Pluto on the angle, and it's squaring the nodal axis. So we know that Pluto is death and rebirth. We know that Pluto stands for reformation, reforming the landscape. Sometimes we mean that literally, and sometimes we mean it metaphorically, so that treaties and things that happen are reformed, reworked, but we can also get land itself being reformed and reworked. Now, let's also have a look at the way this lunar eclipse is connected to Saturn. Saturn at 0 degrees Pisces in that sort of 2 o'clock position on our chart is actually a good connection. The same with the sun down there at the base of the chart in the 4th house, the 6 o'clock position, we see the sun trining Saturn. Now this says many things. Saturn is about time. Saturn is about karma, things coming together in time. So we can see that there's a lot of karma, time being played into this lunar eclipse, things coming from a long time ago, now being up for some kind of a denouement, or at least something that amounts to a reappraisal, and then in the wake of that, some kind of new start. But Saturn, yes, is a very important player here. And in a way, I think it's kind of more powerful at 0 degrees. These 29 0 degrees of each of the signs is a rather intense power point of that sign. And so we're getting a great deal from Saturn, especially as it only recently, well, in fact, it will go stationary direct on the 4th of November. So during the time of this eclipse, Saturn will effectively be stationary. And of course, a planet that's stationary is superpowered. It's intense. It has all of its qualities pushed together. So we get all of those things we know about Saturn. We do get strife and struggle. We do get payback. We do get the idea of things coming together in time. We also get the idea of doing things that require a great deal of, well, courage, certainly, but also finality. I think with Saturn, things have got to be done. The hard decisions have to be made. The hard work has to be done. And, you know, you can look at this in your own world and think about, you know, does this, you know, am I resonating with this? Do these sorts of things, you know, have a resonance in my life too? And as I said, we'll come to that more particularly as I go through sign by sign. So if we go forward from the time of the eclipse, we come first of all to a Venus-Neptune opposition. And as you can see in the map here, we've got Venus at 18 of Virgo, Neptune at 25 of Pisces. They're in opposition. But by the 3rd, they will be exactly opposed. And what we have with Venus-Neptune, on the minus side, we have sacrifice and suffering. We have great acts of selflessness. But we also have the idea that compassion and a very high level of the spirituality, things coming from a higher level, we can appreciate them more. So that's also playing into our lunar eclipse story, as we might say. The Sun-Jupiter opposition is exact on the 3rd of November. And then, of course, we have Saturn turning stationary direct on the 4th of November and Mercury opposing Uranus on the 4th of November. And we can see Mercury here next to the Sun. And if we look at the opposite point, we can see Uranus there at 21 of Taurus, and Mercury will be opposing that point on the 4th of November. Mars will follow suit and oppose Uranus on the 11th of November, and the Sun will follow on the heels of Mars and oppose Uranus on the 13th of November. So you can see that within the range of the time of the eclipse, we have a lot of Uranian activity as well, and that's fairly explosive, but it can also be exciting, and there can be breakthroughs. I often use 3 B keywords for Uranus: breakups, breakthroughs, and breakdowns. And that's something to look at, again, to consider in your own life, especially if, you know, Uranus does indeed connect with anything, any personal or a planet or point in your own natal chart. It's a very, very volatile period, but it's not without its plus points. And if you're looking for breakthroughs, if we want to see some great news about scientific developments and developments in cures and in understanding conditions, then we've got it ripe for this. And we've also got some interesting developments regarding the media, for instance, and even social media. So look out for all these developments around the time of the lunar eclipse and in the wake of that eclipse, the following couple of weeks, which takes us through to about the 13th of November. So I'm going to come away from, oh no, one more thing I wanted to talk about in regard to this. You will see the little glyph for the North Node and the South Node opposite it. It's a little omega sign, and it's telling us the nodal axis is at 24 Aries, 55 minutes. But how come then that the moon and the lunar eclipse is in Taurus and Scorpio? Well, of course, it's near that point where we're looking at the astronomy of things. The sun or the moon has to connect with that nodal axis. And if it is near enough to connect, then that eclipse occurs. That's why we have an eclipse. But it can, of course, be in a neighborhood sign. That doesn't mean that the nodal axis working its way backwards through Aries and its opposite sign Libra isn't significant in and of itself as affecting Aries. And if you've got the nodal axis Aries Libra, Libra Aries, then you know that this period of time going through until next year as well is going to be really, really significant for you. Now, before I have a look at sign by sign, I just wanted to mention something about the effects of the full moon. Now, when I talk about astrology, I say, don't think of it as some kind of cosmic radiation making us do things or making us be like we are. I like to steer away from that. It doesn't mean that there isn't some causal connecting principle between the planets in our solar system, and so that we are resonating with each other. I love that. It's the harmony of the spheres, and the sort of recent findings of gravitational waves are leading us to believe, yes, indeed, everything is indeed connected. That's kind of another thing altogether. But when we come to the moon, our nearest planetary object to Earth, then we think about the idea that the tides, full moon, swelling of the tides. And when we think of the new moon, we think of the taking up of sap. And so we think of new moons as new beginnings and full moons as endings. There tend to be far more health crises at a full moon, and also more babies born at full moon. So we can look at that and think, well, the tides of the body, the biological rhythms, certainly our emotional tides are keyed to this full moon, new moon cycle. And in fact, one of my clients emailed me just recently and asked me if it was the lunar eclipse and actually the solar eclipse too, playing into the sense that she was a little fragile health-wise, physically, mentally, emotionally, and she'd had a bout of COVID. And she wondered if that was to do with the lunar eclipse, solar eclipse. So my response really was, if we think about a full moon making us more emotional and sort of overwhelming us, whether it's with great happiness, joy, or whether it's with experiences we don't like very much, and we think about how much our emotional health and our mental health plays into our physical condition, I think in a way, yes, these eclipses could make you feel extra sensitive and you'd be more vulnerable, because psychically you're a little bit more vulnerable. So hopefully that sort of answers all of that for you. One other thing that I wanted to say, that in reference to the chart of the lunar eclipse, is that the lunar eclipse, which is set for Jerusalem in the chart I showed you, is actually exactly square Israel's natal moon in Leo. So I think it's particularly significant for Israel. And, are we going to deduce anything from this? I think no. I don't think we want to even go there. We just know that it is significant to the people of Israel, whether that's because they feel they have achieved something that will affect them in a settled way. It's a good word to use for, weeks, months, and years to come, or whether it's rather the reverse, we'll have to wait and see. But that's what I mean about looking to see if this lunar eclipse does in fact connect with anything in your natal chart. So let's move on and have a look at it sign by sign. And what I do here to make it enough for you to gain something from this complex astrological pattern is that we do it from the sun signs. So if you're an Aries or a Taurus, listen to what I have to say for Aries and Taurus. However, if you know you've got Aries rising, Libra rising, Sagittarius rising, obviously look at that, because that's going to give you the very clear house position of the eclipse, it directly related to you. But even in general, and we just take a look at the general zodiac and the sun sign interpretations, that's also playing in there as well. So it's very well worth looking at both signs, listening to both sides. Okay, so let's get on with it. So I'm going to start with Taurus, because obviously this lunar eclipse is, the moon is in the sign of Taurus, so that's where we're going to begin. And as you'll see from the diagram here, we've got the moon in the first house, the moon in your sign. It's on the opposite side of the zodiac to the sun. So we've got the moon in the first house, the sun in the seventh. And so we are looking here at relationships primarily. Now, relationships is a very big area of life, isn't it? I mean, we have relationships with our family, and we can find them in the seventh house as well as the fourth house. We can have relationships with our employers or employees. We can have relationships with colleagues, with our business partners, and with our friends. And of course, we can have relationships that most of us really do care about most, I think, and that's with our significant other, or a relationship that has that kind of aura about it. So we look at this lunar eclipse bringing things to a tipping point. So if you've got a relationship issue and it's percolating away there, sure enough, it's going to come right up and demand to be dealt with around the time of this lunar eclipse. And hopefully what you decide and what happens will be final, because there is an element of finality about an eclipse. It's a game changer, therefore it means it's final. But we could also be looking at union here. We look at polarities. The sun is opposing the moon, but we also look at balance and opposing principles being united by the same kind of principle, if you like. So it could be a time of marriage. It could be a time of coming together, a time of healing, a time of ending rifts or making legitimate your relationship, moving in with each other, signing a contract with a company. Could be all of those kind of things. So we look at it at, very opposite ways. They're both applicable to this lunar eclipse. Now, if you look a little bit further into this picture, you'll see that the moon, of course, is close to Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus. And then on the opposite side, in faint pencil, we've got Mars and Mercury. So we can see that this story isn't just about the lunar eclipse. It's about all those other influences taking place right now. And Taurus rising people are in a great period of growth and change. It's a time to set off in new directions and to really claim your power. That's what you do in the first house. So you've got Jupiter at your disposal. So it is time to claim your power. But of course, you can claim your power. You therefore have to be prepared for conflict, or prepared to take other people into consideration with that. And I'm just going to leave you with that. The other thing I want to look at here is Pluto, which is at 2750 odd degrees of Capricorn, near as damn it to 28. You can see that it is sort of playing into this particular lunar eclipse. So we've got Pluto involved, which means that transformation, things were one way, now they're something else. And I think it applies particularly if you have a birthday let's say sort of around the 30th of April, something like that, because, or, 2nd or 3rd of May, 22nd, 23rd of April, around that time, because Pluto is in the mix here as well. And so you're going through a time when things are changing at core level for you. And for that to happen, you have external events that tend to demonstrate that, whether you're giving birth, whether you're getting married, whether you are breaking up, whether your job is lost. These are all the external circumstances which help the process of transformation. But if we look then at the sun trining Saturn in the 11th house there, and we look at the moon sextiling Saturn, we do have this feeling that, yes, hey, you know what? In the long run, this is all going to be all right. So if we come to Gemini now, and let's look at where things are happening for you astrologically in your life. This applies to Gemini rising, or if you have the sun in Gemini. And we can see here the moon in the 12th house, the sun in the 6th house. So we're on the axis of health and well-being. It's also known as the axis of work as well, but it's a little bit more than that. It has a lot to do with the health of mind, body, and spirit. And it's also on the 6th, 12th axis that we align the two worlds, the physical, real world with its demands and responsibilities, with the spiritual world, where everything is, on that kind of level of otherworldliness, if you like. So this axis is very, very sensitive. It's sensitive physically, mentally, emotionally, psychically. So it may be, Gemini, at this time, that you feel overwhelmed by your circumstances, or you have some kind of physical, mental, or emotional complaint, and so that's playing into your circumstances. But let's look at the potential here for aligning the things in your real world and the responsibilities and the duties that you have, the things that supply your purpose in life, with that other much bigger, more spiritual sense of purpose, the spiritual health. Then this is why this is a very profound and powerful moment. And don't be surprised if you get some incredible dreams, or you feel very much very intuitive and very deeply about something, because this is playing on all those aspects of yourself. And if we look here, we see Saturn all dominant at the top of your chart. And we know that Saturn is sextiling the moon, Saturn is trining the sun. And there is that kind of sense of something solid coming out of what you're experiencing at this time. Or maybe it's saying what you have to do is earth the experiences that are coming to you from, perhaps we say, the unconscious mind or the unseen realm. They need bringing into reality. They need earthing. So there are ways to look at that. Well, we look at Saturn as a whole in this all-important position in your solar chart, or if you're a Gemini rising, then on the 10th house. We know that this is a period when you are building your future, but coming up against a lot of obstacles, but you simply have to battle through. So this lunar eclipse may make you just a little bit more aware of the battle ahead and the enormity of the challenge that you face. But hello, we can do this, and aligning mind, body, and spirit with our real world problems and issues and activities, then we're going to be successful. So let's now come to Cancer. Now, if you are a Cancerian, or you have Cancer rising, then this lunar eclipse is going to be flanking the 5th and 11th houses of your horoscope. So we've got the moon in the 11th house, and we've got the sun in the 5th house. This is what I call the axis of gestation. So things that have been coming together over a period of time. Let's think about the idea of gestation, the gestation of a baby, which takes 9 months from seed to flower, so to speak, from conception to delivery. And so that we think about that, and we think about what a purposeful period it has been, with a delivery at the end of it. But there are lots of other things that can have a beginning and a period of time before something is completed. And we may want to go back to the 19th of May, when there was a new moon in Taurus, new moon in your 11th house. Did that coincide with the beginning of a merger of some description? And notice that's a good word, because did you merge with someone in that sense of being involved with them physically? Or did you merge and create an enterprise or an endeavor with people? If you did so around that kind of late April, mid-May period, then the chances are it's ready for delivery. It's ready to reveal itself. But it could also be the end of the matter. Now, we're also looking at relationships that might have begun earlier in the year. And you're at a point now where you're saying, is this a goer? Can we go forward with this? Or have we run out of road? And this lunar eclipse will decide it. And I think certainly if you've been in a relationship for about 3 months or 6 months, 9 months, then that's going to be a definite issue, especially the 3-month issue. It's a gestation period of a sort. And either your feelings are ready to, morph into something more loving and you're committed, or has the flush and blush of romance gone away, revealing something that you don't like very much. So that might also apply, Cancer, if you're in this context. But we're also looking at offspring here as well. Is it that something major is happening to one of your offspring? It doesn't have to be, anything that you need to worry about. It can be an absolutely glorious celebration, whether they've won an award or starring in the school play or getting married or producing babies. Offspring are in here as well. But we might also want to look at if there has been tension, difficulty, upset with one or more of your offspring, then this might be a critical point, because it could go one way or the other. But obviously we want it to go forward in a good way. We want to bring the curtain down on a rift, and we want to go forward really in a new way with lots of lessons learned. But we have to keep it open. Saturn for you is in the 9th house. It's linking beautifully with the moon, trining the sun, which says sometimes you just have to take the higher path. And I would recommend that in almost any situation that you're finding as a dilemma or complex and not knowing what to do. Just take the higher path. It's that simple. Okay, so let's move on now. We have a look at Leo. For Leo, this is one of the more important full moons of the year, because it's on one of the major axes of your horoscope here. So we've got the moon in the 10th house, the sun in the 4th house. And this applies if you've got Leo rising or if you are a sun Leo. So the lunar eclipse is on what we call the life direction axis. The sun in Scorpio at the base here is in the area of home and family, the roots of life, the foundations of your future. Whereas the moon is leading you out into the world, your place in the world, your status, your job, if you have a job. So there is some kind of sense of a balance needing to be found here. And there could be developments on the home front, or there could be developments on the career front. There could be developments linked to your parents or members of the family. And remember, we've got Saturn playing into this. And so Saturn has a lot to do with the elderly. So is this all about the elder generation coming into this lunar eclipse, playing a part, whether this is something that is warmly embraced, or whether it's something that you feel as not a good thing and perhaps adding to your responsibilities and burdens as opposed to lightening them. But remember, whenever Saturn is caught up in something like this, as it is in this lunar eclipse, we have the idea that by embracing difficulties, by making the hard decision, by doing something concrete with a situation, then we are able to move through it and come out the other side. So it's about taking responsibility. And of course, this full moon might mean the end of a job or the end of a period of time in a particular home, or the end of a period of time with a member of the family in the home, which could mean an offspring going off to college. It could mean perhaps an offspring getting married. I mean, there are all sorts of things we can read into this, but it would amount to the end of a chapter, a profound end to an important chapter. And I think I'm going to leave you with that, Leo, because it gives you plenty of things to work with. Although I'll say one last thing, and in reference to what we were looking at the beginning when we looked at the context of this lunar eclipse, what was going on in the with the rest of the planets. We know that Mercury, Mars, the Sun, they're all marching forward to an opposition to Uranus in the wake of this lunar eclipse. So change will follow. And that's important to prepare for change, to get behind it, because change brings liberation. And it's a very easy equation to remember. So let's have a look now at Virgo. And if you are a Sun Virgo or you have Virgo rising, this is what we are going to be looking at. We are looking at the lunar eclipse on the axis of the 3rd and 9th houses. So the moon is in the 9th house, the sun is in the 3rd house. And we call this axis the axis of communication. It has a lot to do with the mind. And it has a lot to do with the spirit as well. But more, funnily enough, this idea of the 9th house is more to do with spiritual systems. So we look at teachings and we look at learning things, acquiring paradigms and structures and cosmologies for ourselves, and taking higher learning. If we look at the sun in the 3rd house, then we're looking at things that are going on in our locale. So they're near to us, they're in our neighborhood, both in the sense of the actual neighborhood where you live, but really more in a kind of metaphor of what's in your neighborhood. What are the things going on in your life of relevance that you're dealing with? So this full moon is about gaining understanding. There was a film years ago called The Getting of Wisdom. It was an Australian film, and I've always loved that phrase, the getting of wisdom, which I think is a 3rd, 9th axis, resonance. So the getting of wisdom may apply in so many ways. Maybe you are finishing a course and you've got your wisdom, you've got your qualifications. Or is it that you're now embarking on a very, very big journey to acquire knowledge? It's also about experience, what you're going through. The events that you're dealing with are a journey in them and of themselves. And perhaps the end of a journey has been reached. There's an understanding has been acquired. And maybe we look at that within this lunar eclipse. And we think about that, not necessarily on the 28th of October, but we think about it in those following 2 weeks or a little bit longer than that. Remember, the timeline of an eclipse is elastic, so we're not necessarily looking at the day. But then I'm looking at, you've got Jupiter and Uranus as, much bigger planets moving through this area, Virgo. So there is a sense that you're being opened up to some very new and interesting concepts and cultures and spiritual experiences. So there's a lot going on already. This full moon may tie it all together in some way or be an important milestone on your journey. And let's look how Saturn plays into this, because there it is on the 7th house cusp. It's sextiling the moon, trining the sun, which says to me that someone plays an integral part in the sense of a journey, particularly in the sense of a journey's end. Is it a mentor figure? Is it a partner? Is it an employer or an employee? Who is it that comes into the mix? Because often the meaning of an eclipse is brought to us by someone, by a real person. So is this really where we perceive what this eclipse is all about? But remember, it's closing a cycle for you, after which a new beginning must be made. And that will evolve in time. You might not see it all in one space of time, but it will. You'll be able to relate this lunar eclipse, the solar eclipse before it, to some kind of ending and new beginning. So if we come now to Libra and have a look where things are for you, of course, you had a solar eclipse in your sign on the 14th of October. So you're already in a very big eclipse cycle, and you are also part of that nodal cycle, North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra. So you're going to pick up right the way through next year as well. This nodal axis is going to be delivering a lot of promise, and it's going to be showing you that the things that happen are part of your fate unfolding. So even though this particular eclipse doesn't involve your sign, it's in your next door neighbor sign, the sun is in Scorpio, the moon is in Taurus, even so, we do have this kind of a feeling that the events around this time are quite fateful. You may feel, oh my goodness, I never expected that. Or wow, does that ever change things? Do I ever see things in a new light? But we look specifically at finances and self-worth here. So self-worth is about how we feel about ourselves. And I always say this when I talk about self-worth, there is this sort of thing that people say, and, they say, oh, you've got to love yourself. And it's a very, very difficult concept, isn't it? Because we're told we shouldn't love ourselves because it's selfish. And so I think that's a kind of mistaken thing to think of. What we really need to be aware of is the value we bring to life. What do we do of ourselves that we bring to life and other people who are part of our lives? Are we full of a sense of value? Do we feel valued for what we're bringing into life? Or do we feel devalued? If so, then this lunar eclipse is an awakening, if you like, to how that balance must be corrected. Because if we don't, have value in ourselves and we're not being treated with respect and love really by other people, then that balance needs to be righted. But let's not forget here that we've got the sun in the 2nd house, we've got the moon in the 8th house, and the 8th house is about other people's money. So it's about our financial relationships with banks, lending institutions, credit card companies, all those kind of institutions. So does this full moon say, hey, guess what? We've got a huge loan. We're signing on the dotted line of that. We've got our money for this particular investment that we need. How great is that? Or does it mean you've got a bit of a debt problem here and outgoings are not balanced by incomings and you've got really overloaded by interest payments or something? Then this lunar eclipse is going to show you that and say, just a minute, things really, really do need to be brought back in balance, and maybe a very radical decision needs to be made. And I call the 8th house the house of receivership, because it's where we receive from others in the sense of, in a relationship, what love we get, sexual interaction, but also it can be money too, a partner's money, money from an inheritance, money from a settlement. And of course, when we think of receivership, we actually say going into receivership. I'm not sure where that came from because it's perfect, isn't it? Here's a lunar eclipse and it's time to go into receivership. So you're playing with all these themes. But let's not forget, Saturn is sextiling the moon and trining the sun. So we're looking at the resolution of this crisis. We're looking at something being stabilized. Ultimately, we're looking at a lesson learned. We are looking at boundaries being created that are necessary. And we are looking at rewards for efforts. So a lot of things coming out of this lunar eclipse at this particular time. And yes, it might help to look back and see what was going on in May around the time of the lunar eclipse on the 5th of May, the 19th of May. Did anything happen around that time? Because we are seeing some resonance with those periods of time, even going to April the 20th and the solar eclipse in Aries. So there could be all sorts of things related to other people, to relationships, to steps taken. And we put Saturn in the mix and we think, yes, this is resolution. Okay, so now we go to Scorpio, and of course the excuse me, the sun is in Scorpio. It's in your sign if you're a Scorpio, or if you've got Scorpio rising, it's in your first house, and the moon is in your 7th house. Now, let's not forget that the moon is only going to spend about 3 days in the sign of Taurus, and therefore about 3 days in the 7th house. So it's very transitory. The main theme is what is the sun doing, because it's got 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks, depending when you're listening to me, to go through your sign. So there's a lot of things to do with empowerment going on. And it's such a good word, isn't it? I mean, it is becoming a little bit too, I don't know, a bit of a cliche, empower yourself and all of that. But it's coming from a true place. And when we do feel that sense of strength and commitment in ourselves and we act on that, that feeling of empowerment will often carry the day. It will take us through. And so I think that this lunar eclipse is about empowerment, Scorpio. And I think if you think it that way and you remember that, you will then see the events that happen around this time, either before the lunar eclipse, after the lunar eclipse. If you see them and think of them as an opportunity to empower yourself, you'll make the most of this eclipse. What you don't want to do is feel disempowered by people. But of course, how you manage this is all important. Now, the other thing about this lunar eclipse on the relationship axis, as we call this one, there is both a polarity and unity. So the sun is opposed to the moon, so we get the idea of oppositions and we think about, conflict. But when things are at opposite ends, they're opposite ends of the same pole. So they have a connection, and it's that connection that can mean unity. So maybe at this time you are making a decision to join forces with somebody. Does that mean marrying someone? Does it mean moving in with someone, starting a very important relationship with someone? Does it mean signing a contract with a company? Does it mean doing something in a way that binds you to an individual or a company? Then this lunar eclipse is showing just how important this will be. Life will change because of this union. But so too, of course, is the prospect of upset, upheaval, good words with Uranus. And as you know, if you watch the earlier part of this video, you would have seen the way the Sun, Mercury, and Mars are all going to oppose Uranus in the coming 2 to 3 weeks. And that's a time of breakups, breakdowns, but breakthroughs, all those big B words. So is this lunar eclipse a forewarning of that, showing you what is likely to happen and what you need to be aware of? It could be just a little event and you think, oh, that's a red flag. But it's also release. Uranus is release as well, freedom, liberation, all the words that we love. So we've got to remember that out of endings comes liberation. And that's another theme you want to play around with, Scorpio. Let's not forget Saturn, 0 degrees of Pisces, trining the sun and sextiling the moon on that eclipse. So there is something lasting coming out of this lunar eclipse and the events that go with this lunar eclipse. And if we think about the idea that I mentioned earlier, the idea that eclipses are finite things, they often make things final and done, dusted, final. We could see Saturn kind of underpinning that, but in a very long-lasting way. So the events of the time are going to have a very, very important effect on your future and on the things that therefore come into life in the wake of this period of time. So here we come on to Sagittarius, and the sun is in your preceding sign, Sagittarius, so it's in your 12th house. And of course, if you've got Sagittarius rising, same thing, sun in the 12th house, moon in the 6th house. And this is a very, very important full moon, and certainly it's a very important eclipse. Now, why is that? Well, a lot of people think that the 12th house, is a sort of a rather strange area where nothing much happens. It's unseen, it's hidden, it's, what do we do with planets in the 12th house? They don't really express themselves very well. That's utter nonsense, they do, but that's another video. Let's think really about the power of the unconscious mind. Things that come into being start with an unconscious thought. That's where things begin. And of course, if you are a sensitive, intuitive type already, then when the sun is passing through the 12th house, you are replenishing your superpowers, your super consciousness. And that can be enormously helpful. The seed sowing that goes on in the 12th house, the seeds of all sorts of new things are beginning to be placed in the ground from which they will start shooting up in the future. So anything around the time of this eclipse that strikes you as strange or meaningful or a synchronicity, or you feel that something very powerful is going on, take it seriously, because this is your super sense telling you, this is really much more important than it seems. Give it the attention it needs. It doesn't necessarily mean you take action on something so much as start a plan of action, which you can then release, fulfill once the sun is in your sign, which it will be from the 22nd of November. So it is a time of seeding on the one hand, of things taking root in the unconscious mind, but also ideas being formed, things you can't see very well, but you will see in the future. But the moon, of course, is in the 6th house, and that's one of the earth houses of the horoscope. And we think it's Virgo's house when we look at it on that perspective. And Virgo is all about the details. It's about putting in the infrastructure. It's about doing your duty, being responsible, doing, what is your purpose, and doing things that are to do with your purpose in life. And often that can be seen as your job, can't it? That's my job, that's my purpose. But it's a little bit more than that when we look at the opposition between the 6th and 12th houses, the relationship between the two, because we are sort of looking at where the conscious real world and the actions we take in the real world that have real effects and are applied consciously also have their roots or are connected and aligned with our dreams, with our intuitions, with our great big spiritual world that's there for us as well. So we see the alignment of these two worlds. And that's why this lunar eclipse is super important. Yes, it may have something to do with your health as well, And because it's a stressy time, a full moon and an eclipse, it can be a stressy time, you'll need to take a little bit more care of yourself around the 28th of October, not push yourself too hard, and to take things a little more gently. And that way, you know, you can experience the magnificence of this eclipse in the sense of its awakenings, but also be connected to the solutions that come from that higher world, if you like, or that resourceful world of our unconscious, if you're faced with problems or difficulties. Yet again, let's not forget Saturn, intimately involved with this lunar eclipse, sextiling the moon, trining the sun, may have something to do with your home life here. Your home, your family, the home itself, things to do with the roots of life, the foundations of life. So that's playing in here. And maybe Saturn as a whole isn't often an easy character to deal with in this position. It can make us feel restricted, and home life isn't what it should be, and we've got family problems. Let's look at the way this lunar eclipse is linked into that. It may mean this is an opportunity to resolve and to work at finding resolution to a problem on the home front. Now let's move to Capricorn, and we can see here for Capricorn, the sun is in the 11th house at the moment, and the moon is in the 5th house at the lunar eclipse. So whether you've got Capricorn rising or you're a sun Capricorn, we've got a 5th 11th axis here, which is the axis of collaboration and creativity. Now, of course, it does depend whether you've got, you know, the first 5 degrees, if you like, of Capricorn rising, then, you know, the sun will most definitely be in the first and in the 11th and 5th houses. But of course, if you've got later degrees, then it's going to shift. It's going to be more in the 10th house and the 4th house. But you'll find that if you go to it on my video, that's always in the details of what's on the video. It'll tell you where to find that, and it will be well worth looking at the exact place where this eclipse falls. But let's talk generally about the 5th 11th axis, the axis of creativity and collaboration. We can have all sorts of collaborations. We can have business collaborations, enterprises that we start that have to do with, making money, making an impact on the world. And we can have enterprises that have to do with social circumstances, all sorts of other things. This 11th house, where your sun is currently moving through and will continue to move through until the 22nd of November, is very idealistic. And what with all these things going on in the world, all the injustices, this could really inspire your sense of wanting to help. So you may decide that what's going on, and especially around this lunar eclipse, it may prompt you into thinking, I want to join this organization. I want to devote myself. I want to help this charity out. I want to get together with like-minded people, and I want to do something. I want to do something that amounts to, being of purpose, being, so I can help. And it's also, of course, collaborations. When we think about the collaborations that we have, I mean, I often say when I'm working with people on relationships, the minute you think of yourself as a team, as opposed to 2 people in a relationship, you're going to find things a lot better, because what do we do when we're on a team? We've got team goals, team spirit, all of that playing in, and that makes a relationship strong. And we've got this idea here with this lunar eclipse that team spirit matters right now. The moon, of course, is in the 5th house. So here we are on the more creative, self-creative aspect of this. And I think if I look at this lunar eclipse and see this happening, it's sort of almost as though you need to recognize that you're not on your own. And that, even if you put your signature on an enterprise, or you feel at the center of an experience, there are other people involved. And for the more you reach out and connect with other people, the more beautiful this lunar eclipse is going to be for you, the more purposeful it's going to be for you, and the more it will resolve any difficulties. It's also the axis of gestation, this 11th, 5th axis. So something that has been developing over a period of time. It may indeed be a baby, so you've got 9 months here, and delivery is expected any day. But we've also got relationships gestating, love affairs, and we've got projects gestating. So if we go back 3 months or we go back 6 months, we have a look at round about the 19th of May, the 5th of May, even the 30th of April. Did something begin around that time? Because it's at a point of reappraisal. It's reached a denouement of some description, so that what you do thereafter is either going to grow it, it's a continuation of it, it's a development and an increase, or it's reached the end. You're done and dusted. This is over. Saturn, of course, is in the mix, your ruling planet. So we've got Saturn sextiling the moon, Saturn trining the sun. So we're looking here at understanding, just how practically you can bring into being the experiences and the events and the understandings made on this lunar eclipse, because Saturn is, if nothing else, the reality, and it needs to be made real. We need to make things physical. So that might play into it. There's also time. It suggests to me that it is time. Era ora, as I often say, the time has come. And you may get that sense around the time of the eclipse, or a little bit before it, or a little bit later. And you can apply that in different areas and to different situations, depending who you are and where you are in life. So Aquarius, we look at this lunar eclipse from your perspective. If you have Aquarius rising, or you are a Sun Aquarius, we're looking at the sun in the 10th house. We're looking at the moon in the 4th house. And this is one of 4 full moons. This one, of course, is an eclipse. But of course, there was another one on May the 5th, the other way around. And so it's one of 4 that are really, really important, because whenever you get a full moon on one of the angles of your horoscope, then it's related to some very important aspects of your existence. And it's a little bit more dynamic than if it was in one of the other areas of your horoscope. It doesn't mean in other areas it can't have significance and it can't tell a story. It's just that if it's on the 4th, 10th axis, or the 1st, 7th axis, then my goodness, this is much more powerful. And it has to do with your life direction. The 10th house is about your place in the world. Where are you going in life? What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? How do you want your material world to look? So it's very much out there. Whereas the 4th house, its opposite point, is very internal. It's a sanctuary. It's your home. It's your family. It's your roots. It's from where you've come. So you can see these 2 areas of life are very much joined together. And they are joined together by our parents very often, because when we're little and we're brought up, our parents instill us with all sorts of values and perhaps even our direction in life, what we want to be and do. And so this full moon can take us right back. This eclipsed full moon could take you right back to your childhood. And on the one hand, it's sort of saying, look, are there things that were planted in childhood or as you were growing up that you want to rethink now? I mean, has it worked well for you? And if it hasn't, then it's time for change. And remember, we've got all those aspects. The Sun, Mercury, and Mars all going to oppose Uranus in the next 2 to 3 weeks after that eclipse. So we are looking at change. We are looking at things being different. And it may have to do with the choices other people have made for you. Even if those choices have been made with love and with care, are they right for you? That's one thing that I want to mention here. It could be that you've come to the end of a job it was meant to come to an end, and here it is, lunar eclipse, end of job. On the other hand, might be a bit of a shock. You weren't expecting to, leave that job or to have things changed in your sphere, in your career sphere, but it is what it is. It's a lunar eclipse. It's done. It's dusted. That's what's happened. You can't change it. I think that's an important thing to recognize, Aquarius. It is what it is. And whatever event that applies to, you have to move forward in a different direction from that point. It may have something to do with your family. Maybe there are changes within the family, whether that means there's some exciting developments, marriage, kids going to college, that kind of thing, which is wonderful. Sad as well, but wonderful. Or is it something much more serious and you've got a bit of a worry about a member of your family? It could do, because let's remember that eclipses bring down a curtain on something. They say, that's it, that's over, it's done and dusted. So we need to look at that as well. But nicely, Aquarius, we've got the moon sextiling Saturn. We've got the sun trining Saturn, Saturn being your old ruler. So it says, look, you're going to get something solid out of all of this, even if you're looking at things at the moment and thinking, how can I get something solid out of all of this? This is, everything has fallen apart. Well, give it time. What do we think of when we look at Saturn? We think about time, don't we? The planet of time. So have faith. But at the same time as having faith, don't just leave it to fate. You have to get stuck in and face some realities and deal with reality. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more at the very end of my video here. Coming on to Pisces. Pisces, for you, this lunar eclipse is on the third ninth axis, as we say in the astrological world. It means the sun is moving through your ninth house and the moon is transiting quickly through your third house. But this is where the eclipse occurs. And this is the axis of communication. So there are all sorts of things that are important being communicated to you at the moment. So let's think about that for a minute. Is information being communicated to you in a conversation, in a discussion? Are you learning something? Are you acquiring knowledge? And with that idea, the idea that, you're moving forward with this. And so it's part of a course, a study course, a learning experience. Is it you're getting some results in? Have you taken an exam or you've done a period of experience or what it may have been, and now the results are in? It could be. And that, of course, that will change things for you, because whether you pass with flying colors or you've got something to go to, it will start a new aspect of your existence. And even if it's not a success and what you have instead is, hello, I'm afraid you've got to go back to the drawing board, do a bit more learning and experiencing, it is what it is, and you'll get it right the next time. I think this axis too has a lot to do with two ways of kind of being, if you like, and we dodge about them consistently, all of us. We think about the future. We think about, what do I want to be doing 3, 4, 10, 15 years down the line? And so we focus our ideas on what do we want to happen? Where do we want to be? What do we need to do in order to get there? Whereas in the third house, we're thinking about what I've got to do today, what happens in the immediate future, what I'm learning here on the ground. And I think this idea of the neighborhood that goes with the third house isn't just the goings on in your neighborhood, near your street or near your farm, or whatever it may be. It's also what's in your neighborhood, meaning what are you dealing with at the moment? What are the things that are in front of you? What matters are you dealing with? What things, what people are in your neighborhood in the sense of what you're dealing with? So we've got a sense here, a balance needed between what you're striving for and what you want your life to be 5, 10, 15 years down the line, and what needs to happen at this moment in time. And there is a balance to be made here. Does it mean that you need to focus on something that's going to give you credentials, or it's going to help a situation in the short term, because looking at things in the long term right now isn't possible. You've got to make some short-term decisions. Yes, I think that's really possible. And a lot of the things that you're going to be doing around this time, Pisces, is that you're going to be thinking about your future. You're going to be thinking about the present. You're going to be thinking about the most responsible way to deal with things. And it may also feel, because remember, Saturn is in your sign, that you've got more responsibilities than other people. You're the one carrying the responsibilities. You're the parent. You're the teacher. You're the person who other people are relying on. But that is what it is, and that's what it's supposed to be. And acquiring and stepping into that role is very empowering. It's certainly, one of the things I say often with Saturn in our sign, we acquire gravitas, which means we've acquired this sense of being a much bigger, more substantial kind of figure. And I think this lunar eclipse will help you become that Saturn figure. And it also suggests that there will be some solid outcomes to what you are involved with at the moment, whether that is due to events happening at this time that you've got to steer your way through, whether it's events that you've been working towards, looking forward to, but they still carry responsibilities. It's as though in the future, down the line, your actions, these experiences are going to matter. They contribute majorly towards your future. And finally, our 12th sign, Aries. Oh, Aries, this isn't you, is it? You like to be first to kick off anything. You are the pioneer. You are the person who likes to be out in front. And here you are. You've taken up the rear here in our journey around the zodiac. But in many ways, this eclipse for you is about a reckoning. And there are all sorts of reckonings that we can have, whether you're making, you're taking account of your actions, or you're the decision maker, you're doing the reckoning, or whether events that are happening are showing you that there's a reckoning going on. Now, I'm looking at your chart here, whether you've got Aries rising or you are a Sun Aries. So we've got the sun in your 8th house. We've got the moon in your 2nd house. And this is called the axis of self-worth. And we need to think about self-worth for a minute, because yes, it is about how much money you have in the bank or how much money you don't have in the bank, what your assets are or they're not. But really and truly, it's about how that all relates to who you are as a person. What sense of value do you have in yourself? And are other people reflecting your true worth? And if we play around with those themes, we won't be too far away. However, the sun is moving through the 8th house, and that's the area of other people's money. It's the area of other people with whom we have financial and sexual relationships. So there's a lot going on here. And I call that 8th house the house of receivership. So it's, are you receiving enough from another person? Are you getting a fair deal? And so this lunar eclipse may highlight that, whether it's imbalance in a relationship, a financial relationship, an emotional relationship, a sexual relationship. If so, that needs to be righted. And remember, the sun will go on, and like Mercury and Mars, to oppose Uranus in the same area of self-worth. So the chances are, if you are finding things wanting around the time of the eclipse, things will break up. There will be an ending. Things will have to be very, very different in order to go forward, or they will end. And that's something that you can play around with a bit, whether we're talking about financial agreements. You've got an agreement with a bank or a credit card company or whatever, and you're thinking, I need to break this agreement now. I need to end it. I need to end all this borrowing. Or is it that you're taking out a mortgage and you've been granted a mortgage? There you're signing up for, a commitment, a financial commitment. So it can be we're looking at that polarity. We're looking at the areas of financial and emotional worth. We're finding, or the lunar eclipse is highlighting what needs to happen in order for all of this to be brought back in balance. You need to look at the balance of your account, whether we're looking at your bank account or whether we're looking at the account you have in a relationship, and things need to be brought back in balance. That is the theme of this lunar eclipse. But of course, like any lunar eclipse, it's going to be high octane. So the good things, the joys are going to be greater than usual, but the miseries are going to be greater than usual. So whenever you are listening to me talking to you here, it's a good idea to think about everything I've talked about and to prepare in some way, to at least give it some thought, even if you don't take action, because these are the things we're looking at. The balance of accounts can be summed up that simply: balancing the accounts. That's it. But of course there'll be events that do that for you, and they can be random. They're going to be different from Aries to Aries. Never forget that. Saturn is in play. So we've got Saturn sextiling the moon. We've got Saturn trining the sun. And so we get a feeling that you will get something concrete out of what happens here. A new way forward, a sense of, being able to resolve old differences, to process things, to that process of dissolution, which is going through things to dissolving their essence. So that this lunar eclipse is going to be useful in that regard. And of course, when we looked at the chart of the eclipse from the perspective of Jerusalem, we saw how closely Pluto was aligned to this eclipse. So, if you're a late Aries, so you're born around about the 16th, 17th of April, or you have planets and points, from 27, 28, 29, have Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, and Libra, or you've got planets and points at 0 degrees of the following signs, then you're going to feel this eclipse and feel the upheaval involved in it, but at the same time, the sense that you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. You simply have to do a lot of, you have to go through quite a lot of upheaval in order to get things back in balance. So my conclusion, what have I been thinking? Well, in reference to all the things I've talked about this lunar eclipse, the idea of Saturn's involvement with this, Pluto less so, and I haven't dealt with that greatly, but I've focused a little bit more on Saturn. And I think what prompted me to do this and to look at Saturn's relationship with this lunar eclipse was to give us something tangible to relate to. I think so often when we are presented with situations beyond our control, we are naturally upset or apprehensive or whatever emotional reaction we have to it. But at some point, we have to get real and we have to deal with that situation. And that's where Saturn comes in. That is our planet of reality. It's also the planet of time. Things coming together in time, but also time back, karma. This is what happens. And sometimes I think we forget, because astrology is about, things otherworldly in a funny kind of way. Yes, it's both a science in that it's the astronomy of where the planets are is correct, but we come along, we astrologers, and say, oh, we're going to say it means something, that we interpret it. So we think about that. And of course, if you're going to embark on astrology, you have to have some kind of sense of that there's something bigger out there, that we are spiritual beings in a material world. But that's where I want to focus on, really. There's a reason why we're here on Earth. We are spiritual beings on a material plane. We are governed by time. We are governed by every law you can imagine, all the laws of science, if you like. So these are natural laws and we must obey them. We have a limited shelf life here, 70 years and 10. Even if you're living longer now, that's getting towards the end, isn't it? So there's this idea that time matters and we're in this plane of reality and we have to deal with the reality. We have to manage our lives in the reality. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be spiritual and we can't connect with a greater power, for want of a better word, and allow ourselves to be opened by that and illuminated by that. Of course, we must. But we can't just do that. We can't just sit back and say, I'm going to open myself up and spirit and whatever system you have of understanding what all those layers of reality might be. We can't leave it to them to sort it out. That's why we're here. We're here to sort it. Whether we think about what's going on in various parts of the world, these terrible conflicts that we've got everywhere, terrible injustices, awful things going on, we have to sort it. We human beings have to sort it. I'm not saying there wasn't any spiritual guidance there at all, but that's why we're here, because it's up to us to deal with it. And I think when we get that, we can accept the fact we're spiritual beings in a material world, but we're not going to abdicate responsibility. We're going to take full responsibility for what's going on in our lives. And I've had to do that recently. I've had to look at a situation and say, look, hello, this isn't just something else, someone else. This is me. I'm going to have to really look at this, dig deep, and find out what it is that I need to do to fix this situation. So we need to take practical steps to deal with a situation in our lives, and we can extend that into a much greater way and think about all the big problems in the world where we've got different governments figuring out, sometimes in their own interest, what they should do, but hopefully in their best interest. That's all decisions we are going to be making and actions that we take in the real world. And actually, we are stronger for that if we combine our spirituality with our action in the real world and we look at situations in a real way and deal with them in a real way. We have much more of a sense of working through them. And I do really believe that nothing is set in stone. Yes, occasionally we have flashes of the future, and that makes us think, oh my goodness, was that already written? Well, maybe there are things that are written, but we come along, we make decisions, we can affect the future. That's what astrology teaches us. It's the narrative of our lives going on. So whether we do this in an individual way, in our own life and our individual circumstances, we don't assume fate just happened, therefore we can't do anything. We think about, oh, what just happened? What do I do next? What is the right move? What is the right action? So that's really, really important, because we contribute. When we do that in our little lives of no consequence, it helps the very bigger picture about humanity and where we are heading. The decisions we individually make now in our own lives are contributing towards the much bigger decisions governments and nations may make, which of course contributes to where humanity is heading. And we have the ability to change that by our intelligence, by our superpowers, if you like, but also by really grappling with situations in their reality and in their totality. So it's over. I've gone through the lunar eclipse. I hope you're still with me. I hope you're not all asleep, yawning there. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.